In 1935, a bright red roadster roared across the Bonneville Salt Flats at a speed that seemed impossible, 104 miles per hour. Ab Jenkins was behind the wheel, and the car beneath him was an Auburn Speedster, a machine so beautiful, so fast, and so wildly ambitious that it should have launched a dynasty. Instead, within 2 years, the company that built it would be dead. This is the story of the Auburn Speedster and the engine that made it legendary. Along the way, we'll encounter visionary designers, reckless gamblers, speed records that stunned the world, and a collapse so complete that nothing survived but the myth. So, let us begin. But first, how did a small car company from Indiana end up building one of the fastest machines on the planet? The Auburn Automobile Company started, like so many American car companies, in the final years of the 19th century. The year was 1900, and the Eckhart brothers, Frank and Morris, were carriage builders in Auburn, Indiana. Now, Auburn, Indiana was not Detroit. It was not even close to Detroit. It was a small town in the northeast corner of the state, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and ambition was measured in acres, not horsepower. But the Eckharts saw what was coming. The automobile was going to change everything, and they wanted in. Their first cars were modest, single-cylinder engines, chain drives, the kind of early automobiles that looked like someone had bolted an engine to a horse buggy, which honestly is pretty much what they were. But the Eckharts were craftsmen. They knew how to build things that lasted, and they knew how to make things beautiful. By 1903, they had transitioned fully from carriages to cars, and the Auburn Automobile Company was officially in business. For the next 2 decades, Auburn built solid, respectable vehicles. Nothing flashy, nothing revolutionary, just good, reliable cars for the Midwestern market. They survived World War I. They survived the recession of 1920. But by 1924, the company was in trouble. Sales had collapsed. The factory was producing cars that nobody wanted to buy. There were 700 unsold vehicles sitting in the lot, gathering dust. The Eckhart family was desperate for a solution, and then Errett Laban Cord walked through the door. Now, E.L. Cord was not your typical automobile executive. He was 29 years old, impossibly charming, and absolutely fearless when it came to money. He had started out selling cars in Chicago, moved into racing promotion, and developed a reputation as the kind of man who could sell anything to anyone. The Eckharts brought him in as general manager, hoping he could move those 700 unsold cars. Cord did more than that. He transformed the entire company. The first thing he did was take those dusty, unsold Auburns and give them a makeover. New paint, nickel-plated trim, cosmetic upgrades that cost almost nothing, but made the cars look like they belonged in a showroom instead of a scrapyard. He sold every single one of them within months. The Eckharts were impressed. Cord was just getting started. See, Cord understood something that a lot of car manufacturers missed. In the 1920s, America was changing. The economy was booming. People had money, and they wanted to spend it on things that made them feel special. Luxury was becoming a selling point, not a liability. And speed, well, speed was becoming an obsession. The automobile wasn't just transportation anymore. It was a status symbol. It was freedom. It was the future. Cord looked at Auburn and saw potential, not for building more reliable Midwestern sedans, but for building something extraordinary, something that would make people stop and stare, something fast. By 1926, Cord had taken control of the company entirely. He brought in new designers, new engineers, and a new philosophy. Auburn was going to become a luxury brand. And the centerpiece of that transformation would be an engine unlike anything the company had ever built, the straight 8. Now I should explain what a straight 8 is because it matters. Most car engines at the time were 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder designs. A straight 8 was exactly what it sounds like, 8 cylinders arranged in a single row. The result was an engine that was longer than most cars' hoods could accommodate, but impossibly smooth. No vibration, no harshness, just power, delivered in a silky, continuous wave. Straight eights had been around since before World War I, but they were rare, expensive, the domain of ultra-luxury brands like Duesenberg and Packard. The idea that Auburn, a small, struggling company from Indiana, could build a competitive straight eight seemed almost laughable. Cord didn't care. He hired Lycoming, an engine manufacturer he would eventually acquire, to develop an 8-cylinder power plant specifically for Auburn. The result was a 4.5-liter engine producing around 88 horsepower. That might not sound like much today, but in 1925, it was remarkable. More importantly, it was smooth, quiet, refined. The kind of engine that made you feel like you were driving something special. The Auburn 8 debuted in 1925, and it was an immediate sensation. Cord had priced it aggressively, far below what competitors like Packard were charging for their 8-cylinder cars. Suddenly, the straight 8 wasn't just for millionaires. Middle-class buyers could afford one. Auburn sales exploded. But Cord wasn't satisfied. He wanted more power, more speed, more prestige. This is where it gets interesting. In 1928, Cord made a move that would define Auburn's legacy. He acquired Duesenberg Motors. Now, Duesenberg was legendary. Fred and August Duesenberg were engineering geniuses who had built race cars that dominated Indianapolis. Their engines were works of art, powerful, sophisticated, and brutally fast. The problem was they had no idea how to run a business. Cord did. The acquisition gave Auburn access to Duesenberg's engineering expertise, but more importantly, it gave Cord a vision. He didn't just want Auburn to build luxury cars, he wanted Auburn to build the fastest cars in America. The Speedster was born from that ambition. The first Auburn Speedster appeared in 1928, and it was unlike anything the company had produced before. Long, low, and impossibly elegant, it looked like it was moving even when it was standing still. The boat-tail design, a tapered rear end that came to a point like the stern of a racing yacht, was borrowed from European sports cars, but Auburn made it their own. Chrome exhaust pipes snaked along the hood. The cockpit was intimate, designed for 2 people and nothing else. This was not a car for hauling groceries. This was a car for going fast and looking good while doing it. Under that long hood sat a supercharged straight 8 engine, and here's where things got serious. Supercharging was still relatively exotic in the late 1920s. The basic principle was simple: force more air into the engine, burn more fuel, make more power. But the engineering was complex and the results could be unpredictable. Get it right, and you had a monster. Get it wrong, and you had an expensive paperweight. Auburn got it right. The supercharged engine in the 1935-36 Speedster, the pinnacle of Auburn's engineering, produced 150 horsepower. In a car that weighed just over 3,500 pounds, that was extraordinary. For context, most family sedans of the era made around 80 horsepower. The Speedster had nearly twice that, and it felt like even more. If you've made it this far, you're probably into this kind of stuff. Quick question, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And hey, subscribe if you haven't. We do this every week. All right, let's talk about what that power actually meant. Ab Jenkins was a professional speed driver from Utah, a man who had spent his career chasing records on the Bonneville Salt Flats. In 1935, Auburn brought him a Speedster and asked him to prove what it could do. Jenkins took the car to the Salt Flats and ran it flat out. 104.7 miles per hour. Think about that for a moment. In 1935, on a public road, in a car you could theoretically buy from a dealership, over 100 miles an hour. Jenkins didn't just set one record, he set multiple. The Speedster held the American stock car speed record for its class, and Auburn made sure everyone knew it. Every single 851 and 852 Speedster came with a plaque on the dashboard. It read, This certifies that this car has been driven 100.8 miles per hour before shipment. Ab Jenkins's signature was engraved below. It was part guarantee, part marketing genius. You weren't just buying a fast car, you were buying a certified fast car, a car that had proven itself before you ever turned the key. The Speedster became the face of Auburn. It appeared in advertisements, at auto shows, at racetracks across the country. It was everything Cord had dreamed of. A statement of American engineering, a symbol of speed and luxury and ambition, and it was all built on a lie. Okay, that's too strong. Let's say it was built on borrowed time. Because here's the thing about E.L. Cord. He was brilliant at building an image. He was brilliant at acquiring companies and extracting value from them. But he was also wildly overextended. Throughout the late 1920s and early 1930s, Cord had been on an acquisition spree. Auburn, Duesenberg, Lycoming, American Airways. He was building an empire, but he was doing it with debt and stock manipulation and the kind of financial engineering that looks like genius when the market is rising and looks like fraud when it isn't. The Great Depression hit in 1929, and everything changed. At first, Cord seemed immune. Auburn sales actually held up reasonably well in the early 1930s, partly because the company had positioned itself so effectively. The cars were luxurious, but not absurdly expensive. The Speedster, in particular, offered incredible value. You got supercharged performance and stunning looks for a fraction of what a Duesenberg or Packard cost. People still wanted to dream, even in hard times, and Auburn gave them something to dream about. But the underlying business was rotten. Cord had structured his empire through a holding company called the Cord Corporation, and the financial arrangements were baroque. Money flowed between subsidiaries in ways that regulators didn't understand, and probably wouldn't have approved if they had. The Securities and Exchange Commission was created in 1934, and almost immediately they started looking at Cord. Meanwhile, sales were beginning to collapse. The problem wasn't the cars. The Speedsters were as beautiful and fast as ever. The problem was the market. By 1935, the Depression had ground on for 6 years. The people who could afford luxury cars had already bought them. The people who couldn't afford them weren't going to start now, no matter how many speed records Ab Jenkins set. Auburn tried to adapt. They introduced cheaper models, scaled back production, cut costs wherever they could. But the company was caught in a trap. The very things that made Auburn special, the handcrafted details, the exotic engineering, the supercharged engines, were expensive to produce. You couldn't build a Speedster on an assembly line. Each one required skilled labor, time, and attention. As volumes dropped, per unit costs rose. As costs rose, prices had to rise too. As prices rose, fewer people bought them. A death spiral. Cord saw the writing on the wall. In 1934, he had launched a new car under his own name, the Cord 810, hoping to create an even more advanced luxury vehicle that could compete with the best in the world. The 810 was revolutionary, front-wheel drive, hidden headlights, a design so futuristic that it looked like it had come from another decade entirely. It was, in many ways, Cord's masterpiece. It was also a disaster. The 810 had been rushed to market to generate excitement at the 1935 auto shows. But the engineering wasn't finished. Early cars had transmission problems, cooling problems, problems that should have been caught in testing but weren't because there wasn't time. The negative publicity was devastating. Orders dried up. The Cord Corporation's stock price collapsed. By 1936, the SEC investigation had intensified. Cord was spending more time with lawyers than with engineers. The company was hemorrhaging cash. And then, in August 1937, Cord made a decision that shocked everyone. He sold everything. The Auburn Automobile Company, Duesenberg, Cord, Lycoming, all of it, the entire empire, dismantled and sold off to the highest bidders. Cord himself took the money and moved to England, where he lived comfortably for the rest of his life, far from the wreckage of his dreams. The last Auburn Speedsters rolled off the line in 1936. The last Cord 812s, an updated version of the troubled 810, were built in 1937. Duesenberg died the same year. 3 legendary American automobile brands extinguished almost simultaneously. The factories in Auburn, Indiana fell silent. Now here's the strange part. The cars themselves, especially the Speedsters, became more valuable in death than they had ever been in life. Almost immediately after production ended, collectors began hunting for surviving examples. The boat-tail Speedsters, with their dramatic styling and certified speed records, were particularly prized. By the 1950s, they were fetching prices that would have seemed absurd to the people who built them. By the 1970s, they were selling for 6 figures. Today, an original 851 or 852 Speedster in good condition can sell for over $1 million. The irony is brutal. The cars that couldn't find enough buyers to keep the company alive are now among the most sought-after automobiles in the world. Auburn's failure wasn't a failure of product. It was a failure of timing, of management, of financial engineering. The Speedster was everything it claimed to be: fast, beautiful, and revolutionary. It just wasn't enough to save the company that built it. And what of the people behind it? E.L. Cord lived until 1974. He made and lost several more fortunes after leaving the automobile industry, investing in real estate, radio stations, and various other ventures. He never built another car. In his later years, he occasionally gave interviews about the Auburn Cord Duesenberg era, and there was always a note of wistfulness in his voice. He had come so close to creating something permanent, something that would last. Instead, he had built a monument to ambition that crumbled almost as soon as it was finished. Ab Jenkins, the speed record driver, continued racing for decades. He set more records on the Bonneville Salt Flats than any other driver of his generation. But he always spoke fondly of the Auburn Speedster, the car that had made his name. It was, he said once, the finest American sports car ever built. Whether that was strictly true is debatable. That he believed, it is not. The Duesenberg brothers, Fred and August, had already been sidelined by the time the company collapsed. Fred died in 1932 from injuries sustained in a car accident. August lived until 1955, working as a consulting engineer, but never again achieving the heights of the Duesenberg era. Their name became synonymous with excellence. It's a doozy entered the American lexicon as slang for something outstanding, but the company itself was gone. The town of Auburn, Indiana, never fully recovered from the loss of its automobile industry. The factories were converted to other uses. The workers found other jobs. But the memory lingered. Today, the Auburn Cord Duesenberg Automobile Museum stands on the site of the original company headquarters, preserving the legacy of those brief, brilliant years when a small town in Indiana built some of the fastest cars in the world. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder what might have been if the Depression had come a few years later, if Cord had been more cautious with his finances, if the SEC hadn't started investigating, if. But history doesn't deal in hypotheticals. The Auburn Speedster existed, blazed across the American landscape like a comet, and then disappeared. 100 miles an hour, certified and signed by Ab Jenkins himself. Some things are too good to last. The Auburn Speedster was one of them. A car so beautiful, so fast, and so impossibly ambitious that it seemed to belong to a future that never quite arrived. The engine set records that stunned the world. The company behind it made decisions that doomed it to extinction. And in the end, all that remained were the cars themselves, scattered across collections and museums, waiting for someone to turn the key and remember what speed used to mean. And that is the story of the Auburn Speedster. Subscribe if you want more, and let me know in the comments. Had you heard of Auburn before this? Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.